They thought she was just a temp, quiet, invisible. She came for a week, she never left. Subscribe. Some truths whisper, I speak them. Clara lived in a rented room on the second floor of a sagging Victorian house at the edge of town. The wallpaper had peeled decades ago, revealing water-stained plaster, and the wooden floor creaked with every step like a quiet protest. Her bed was narrow, her clothes plain, and her life wrapped itself in silence so tightly that she sometimes wondered if she was slowly disappearing from the world without anyone noticing. Each morning, she took the same bus, sat in the same seat, and walked the same grey corridor of the county hospital where she worked as a low-level orderly. Her job was unglamorous and thankless, bathing patients, changing sheets, mopping up messes that never ended. She moved through her shifts like a ghost, speaking only when absolutely necessary. Her colleagues barely acknowledged her anymore. They had long stopped trying. At lunch, she ate alone in the staff break room, quietly peeling an orange or staring through the grimy window into the parking lot. Even outside of work, Clara remained unseen. At the grocery store, she avoided eye contact, always opting for the self-checkout lane when she could. If someone greeted her on the street, she'd respond with a small nod and keep walking. The locals referred to her in passing as the quiet one or that nurse lady, though no one really knew where she lived or what her story was. It was easier that way. At night, Clara sat on the edge of her bed and recorded her voice into an old, battered tape recorder. The machine clicked softly as it captured her flat, careful words. She never replayed the tapes. Once finished, she'd rewind them and tape over them again the next night. It was a ritual more than a diary, like leaving a fingerprint on air. She didn't dream of change, but it came anyway. One Thursday afternoon, a notice was posted in the break room. A wealthy woman, once a famous author, was in need of a live-in caregiver. The job would require someone discreet, reliable, and used to handling difficult patients. The woman, now elderly and suffering from worsening dementia, lived alone in a large house outside the city. There were no family members nearby, and the agency had been struggling to find someone appropriate. Clara read the paper twice. She didn't raise her hand or ask questions. That evening, she called the number at the bottom of the page from a payphone outside the laundromat. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she confirmed her availability. The next morning, she handed in her notice. No one asked where she was going. No one offered a farewell. By Saturday, she was on a bus again, this time headed in the opposite direction, toward a house she had never seen, belonging to a woman she had never met. Clara stared out the window as the buildings thinned into trees, the city falling away like a molted skin. She clutched her old canvas bag to her chest, inside of which were only the basics: a change of clothes, a small stack of bills, a comb, and her tape recorder. Nothing more, nothing less. She didn't look back. The house stood like a monument to something long dead. A Victorian estate, 3 stories tall, with steep gables and a wraparound porch sagging under its own weight. Ivy had overrun the southern wall and the windows were streaked with age and rain. Inside, it smelled of time itself, dust, old wood, books never opened again. Each room was dimly lit, not out of neglect, but out of a kind of reverence, as if bright light might disturb the ghosts that lived in the corners. Clara arrived with her small bag and stood quietly in the foyer, waiting to be acknowledged. The woman who finally emerged was older than Clara expected. Joan Green, once a name spoken with awe in literary circles, now moved slowly, like someone unsure of where her body ended and the shadows began. Her hair was silver and thick, drawn back into a low bun. Her eyes were sharp one moment, vacant the next. She looked at Clara for a long time, her expression unreadable, and then she smiled. It wasn't a welcoming smile, nor a warm one. It was the smile of someone seeing something familiar and confusing all at once. That same day she called Clara Rachel. Not once, not as a slip, but deliberately, as if she were sure. Rachel, she said, had returned. The sister, long estranged. The one who had vanished after a bitter argument nearly 3 decades ago. Clara didn't correct her. At first it seemed harmless, maybe even expected. Dementia played cruel tricks, and who was she to argue with what brought comfort? But something in the name stuck to her like wet fabric. When Joan spoke it, Clara didn't flinch. She listened. She responded. It became a strange kind of invitation. The house itself encouraged the illusion. Each hallway revealed another room, another preserved memory. Framed letters under glass, yellowed and cracked, photographs of two young women on a beach, smiling, wind in their hair. Book covers hung like trophies, each bearing Joan's name in bold serif. The study was lined with shelves that touched the ceiling, heavy with leather-bound volumes, manuscripts tied with ribbon, and notebooks filled with delicate cursive. At night, after Joan had gone to bed, Clara wandered. She moved barefoot through the upstairs hallways, opened drawers gently, read pages left behind. She found journals, some decades old, others more recent, where Joan wrote in loops and slashes, sometimes clear, sometimes manic. There were mentions of Rachel, regrets, accusations, even longing. Clara began to underline those passages in pencil, not to highlight them, but to own them, to claim the role being offered to her. She paid attention to everything: the names in Joan's phone book, the voice of the lawyer who called once a week, the prescriptions lined up in the bathroom cabinet, the post-it notes Joan left for herself in the kitchen, each one slightly more frantic than the last. Clara didn't just take care of her, she studied her. Every habit, every trigger, every remembered sorrow. She began to speak more softly, as if guarding some secret. She chose her words carefully, imitating the cadence of someone born into books and old money. She started wearing one of Joan's old shawls around the house, saying it helped with the draft. Joan never questioned it. No visitors came, no friends called, no family appeared at the door. The house existed in its own slow orbit, sealed from the rest of the world. Clara realised that no one was watching, no one was checking. The name Rachel wasn't just a slip of memory, it was a vacant identity, unclaimed and waiting. And Clara, who had always been no one, began to fill it. It happened on a pale, windless afternoon, the driveway filled with the sound of tyres on gravel, and Clara, standing at the kitchen sink, felt something tighten in her chest before she even saw the car. A silver sedan pulled up, clean and new, too polished for this place. The woman who stepped out moved with an ease that didn't belong here. She wore tailored clothes, carried a leather bag, and her face, though lined by time and sun, bore an unmistakable resemblance to the faded photographs in the hallway. Rachel, the real Rachel. Clara watched from behind the curtain, barely breathing. She didn't panic. Instead, she stepped back slowly and began mentally rearranging everything. Joan was sitting in the parlour, drowsy from her afternoon tea, when Rachel entered the house. For a flicker of a moment, something lit up in Joan's face. Recognition, surprise, maybe fear. But before she could fully respond, Clara intercepted them. She moved with quiet purpose, placing a firm hand on Joan's shoulder, explaining in a calm tone that today wasn't a good day, that Joan was having one of her episodes, and that any meaningful conversation would be better postponed. Rachel hesitated. Clara noted the flicker of suspicion behind her eyes. But Rachel was polite. She agreed to wait until morning. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She waited until the house was silent, then entered the guest room where Rachel had placed her suitcase. She opened it carefully, noting the contents. A small pill organizer, a journal with a leather cover, toiletries, 2 neatly folded sets of clothing. She examined the medication first, memorizing the labels, the dosages. One of the bottles was marked with a red warning sticker, "Do not mix with alcohol." Clara made a note of that. She checked the bathroom, counted the pills again. Rachel had brought everything with her: documents, identification, an international phone still charging on the nightstand. Clara unplugged it and pocketed the cord. Then she found the wallet, hidden deep in the bag, filled with old receipts and a faded photograph of 2 girls standing on a porch swing. In the morning, Rachel was gone. Clara said she had gone for a walk in the woods behind the house. A peaceful morning ritual. But noon passed. Then evening. No messages, no return. Her car still sat in the drive, untouched. Joan asked once, "Where's Rachel?" Clara replied gently that she'd stepped out. Joan seemed satisfied. Later she asked again, but this time she confused the name, calling her sister Rebecca or Ruth. Clara never corrected her. By the 3rd day, Rachel's things had disappeared. Clara folded the clothes and placed them in a sealed box in the attic. The wallet and photograph went into a locked drawer in Joan's desk. The journal she kept for herself. No one came looking. There were no calls, no visitors. Rachel had lived abroad for so long that few even remembered her. and those who did likely assumed she had returned home. Clara continued her duties as before, preparing Joan's meals, administering her medication, reading to her from her own novels. The questions about Rachel came less frequently now. When they did, Clara would pause, tilt her head, and answer softly, as though she herself weren't sure. The fog in Joan's mind did the rest. Over time, even the mention of the name caused Joan to frown, uncertain, as if the memory of her sister had never been clear to begin with. Clara became the only consistent presence, the only face that remained familiar. Like a nurse adjusting an IV line, she didn't need to remove anything entirely, just reroute it. A subtle turn of the valve, a quiet redirection of flow. Joan was fading. It began slowly. Missed meals, long silences, hours spent staring at the same patch of wallpaper in the sitting room. Then came the confusion, the nights filled with cries and murmurs, as if she were trapped in a dream she couldn't wake from. She called out for people no longer living. She whispered apologies to empty corners. Sometimes she believed she was still a girl, waiting by the window for someone who never returned. Other nights, she clutched Clara's hand with desperate intensity, asking questions that made no sense and forgetting the answers moments later. Clara kept her steady. She maintained routines, administered the medications, adjusted the lighting to keep shadows at bay. But the house felt different now, less like a place of memory and more like a waiting room between worlds. Joan was slipping, and Clara knew it was only a matter of time. One evening, Joan insisted on writing a letter. Her hands trembled, but she was insistent. She took out a sheet of old stationery, the kind with a crest embossed at the top, and addressed it carefully. To Rachel. Clara watched from the doorway, quiet and still. Joan wrote for nearly an hour, pausing often, whispering to herself, crossing out words and beginning again. When she finished, she folded the letter neatly, sealed it with wax, and asked Clara to post it in the morning. Clara nodded. Later that night, after Joan had fallen asleep, Clara took the letter from the desk drawer. She read it slowly, absorbing every line. It was a confession, an apology tangled with guilt and fading clarity. Joan asked for forgiveness. She admitted to cruelty, to pride, to years wasted on silence. Clara read it twice. Then she burned it. The next day, she sat at Joan's desk and carefully rewrote the letter in the same voice, using the same stationery. The pen moved slowly across the page, mimicking the hesitant loops of an old woman's script. But this version was different. This one was addressed not to Rachel, but to Clara Green. It contained gratitude, not guilt. It praised kindness, devotion, and the quiet presence that had become Joan's only comfort. It ended with a blessing, as if passing something on. When she was done, Clara sealed the envelope and placed it in the drawer where the original had been. 2 days later, Joan disappeared from her bed. The search began in the house and then moved to the garden. Clara found her near the back fence, curled beneath the maple tree, barefoot and still. Her nightgown was damp with dew. Her skin had turned pale, lips slightly blue. The wind had picked up in the early hours, and no one knew how long she had been outside. The doctor arrived quietly, examined the body, and noted the probable cause as natural. No signs of struggle, no suspicion, just another old woman lost in her illness, who wandered too far. Clara arranged the Bericlean without ceremony. A plain coffin, a rented plot. Only the lawyer stood beside her as the earth covered the box. There were no eulogies, no music, no guests. Joan Green, once a household name, was laid to rest in silence. After the burial, the lawyer handed Clara an envelope. Inside was a copy of Joan's will, dated 1 year earlier. Everything, property, royalties, personal belongings, was left to Rachel Green. No amendments, no witnesses to contradict it. As far as anyone knew, the sister had returned, had cared for Joan, had been with her to the end. There was no one left to question it. Clara signed the papers, her new name written in steady hand, Clara Green. Time moved differently in the house now. The days no longer slipped by unnoticed. They were structured, curated, imbued with a quiet purpose. Clara lived alone in the estate, no longer as a guest, not even as a caretaker, but as someone who belonged. The house had absorbed her, and she had absorbed it. She moved through its rooms with calm authority, touching its objects as if they had always been hers. There were no locked doors anymore, no forbidden drawers, no hesitation. Each morning she brewed tea in the sunlit kitchen and sat in the study to answer letters. The mailbox never overflowed, but there was a steady trickle. Former readers, students of literature, small literary magazines asking for insight into Joan Green's work. Clara responded with care. Her tone was warm but formal. She signed each reply on behalf of the Green family and sometimes literary executor. No one questioned her role. The handwriting, the tone, the knowledge, it all fit. She began organising Joan's unpublished writings. Some were no more than fragments, others complete but forgotten. Clara edited them with reverence, preserving the voice while tightening the structure. She didn't change the heart of the stories. She only clarified them like polishing glass. A few of the essays were published posthumously in small journals. The byline always remained the same. Joan Green. Once a week she visited the cemetery. The grave sat beneath a low tree, not far from the fence line. The stone was plain, engraved with Joan's name, her birth and death dates, and a simple inscription. She wrote what others could not say. Clara always brought a single white flower and placed it carefully at the base of the headstone. She never stayed long at the grave itself. Instead, she sat on the wooden bench nearby. The bench was unremarkable, weathered by seasons, its slats worn smooth by time. But beneath it, buried in a small metal box, lay two objects, a letter and an old tape recorder. Clara had placed them there herself one quiet evening weeks after the funeral. The letter, written in Joan's hand but forged with careful deliberation, was addressed to her, Clara Green. The recorder still worked, though she never played back the tapes. She didn't need to hear her own voice again. Every few months, when the air felt heavy or the silence too wide, she would unearth the box, sit on the bench and read the letter. Her hands always trembled as she unfolded the paper. The ink had not faded. The words were always the same. You were the one I waited for. Forgive me for not seeing it sooner. Now you may live. My life is yours. My name is yours. Thank you. Clara read the lines slowly as if they were scripture. Her throat would tighten, her vision blur. The tears that came were quiet, controlled. Not sorrowful, not nostalgic. They were the tears of someone who had endured something vast and unspoken and had emerged intact. They were the tears of someone who had claimed a life, fully and without apology. She always returned the letter to the box, folded exactly as before, and sealed it away. Then she stood, brushed the dirt from her hands, and walked back to the house. There was always more work to do. Letters to answer, words to preserve. The past no longer haunted the halls. It lived there, carefully arranged and obedient, and in its silence Clara had found a kind of peace. The afternoon light fell gently across the study, filtering through gauzy curtains and warming the dark wood of the bookshelves. The room, once Joan's sanctuary, had become something else now, curated, ordered, inhabited. Clara sat in a high-backed armchair near the fireplace, her posture straight, her hands resting calmly on her knees. On the wall behind her hung a portrait of Joan Green, painted years ago. The resemblance between the woman in the frame and the one seated beneath it was striking now, subtle but undeniable. The same posture, the same measured gaze, a shared elegance carved by time. A young woman sat across from Clara with a notepad on her lap. She was a journalist from a small literary review, eager, respectful, asking soft questions in a reverent tone. She had come to write about legacy, about memory, about the quiet after a voice has stopped speaking. Clara answered with care. Her voice was low and deliberate, each sentence shaped like a line from a memoir. She spoke of responsibility, of carrying forward a life's work, of the tenderness required to preserve someone's truth. Her words were neither boastful nor false. They simply fit. The interview ended politely. The journalist stood, thanked Clara, and left with a promise to send a draft before publication. The front door closed with a gentle thud, and the house fell still once more. Clara remained in her chair for a moment, listening to the silence as if it were music. Then she rose. Her steps echoed lightly as she descended the narrow staircase to the basement. The air grew cooler, the walls lined with shelves stacked high with boxes, files, old manuscripts. In the far corner sat a row of vintage suitcases. Most were labelled in Joan's careful script. One was not. It was older, scuffed, without a tag. Clara knelt beside it, opened the latches and lifted the lid. Inside were the belongings of Rachel Green, the real Rachel. A cardigan, soft with age, a linen blouse, a pair of sunglasses wrapped in tissue paper. There was a small perfume bottle, nearly empty, and a paperback novel with a cracked spine. Clara reached in and touched the blouse, smoothing its fabric with her fingertips. The scent had faded, but the weight of the object remained. She sat there quietly for a long time, then reached deeper into the suitcase and pulled out a small hand mirror. Its silver frame was tarnished, the glass slightly warped. She turned it toward herself. At first, her reflection looked back, calm and composed, but as she stared, her features seemed to shift. Not change, but double. A flicker of something else passed over her face. 2 women, 2 timelines, 2 lives, layered imperfectly. For a moment she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Then the image settled, only one face remained. She placed the mirror back in the case, folded the blouse neatly and closed the lid. The latches snapped shut with a dull click. She stood, crossed the room and turned off the single bulb that lit the basement. In the darkness, the past settled quietly into its place. Clara climbed the stairs, one hand on the rail, her steps steady. She emerged into the light above and walked down the hall with ease. The house welcomed her, absorbed her, reflected her back without question. She was home. She was Clara Green, and no one remembered anything different.